So, anybody who has been here before for one of these Switch recordings knows that I like to start things off with a quote. This one is from John Steinbeck. I've seen a look in dogs' eyes, a quickly vanishing look of amazed contempt, and I'm convinced that basically dogs think humans are nuts. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest on this week's episode of The Switch, Ian Stone from Simpatico Dog Training. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. How are you guys doing? It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Doing great. So I want to get into some dog training stuff, some dog psychology, maybe where it, intersects with human psychology. But before we get into all those awesome ideas, I want to hear a little bit about your story, your company, sort of where things came from, and talk about, the context of your experience. I typically like to frame this question like this. If you could divide your life into epochs, at the very least where I was then and where I am now, you can do more if you want. How would you mark some of those transitional moments? How would you mark some of the mind change moments or influences or experiences in your life? And just walk us through from as early as you want.
Wow. Well, man, that's a lot of epochs.
We've
I
got
don't know.
time.
Are we talking like from birth till now, or are we talking strictly in terms of dog training, or?
No, so you can start us at the beginning. A lot of people. Okay, how about this? I'll guide you through with a little bit more pointed questions.
Yeah,
Where
absolutely.
where did you grow up?
I grew up. I'm a West Coaster.
Okay.
I'm from Southern Oregon, which is all on fire right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. Went to high
Did,
school there, went to college there, the whole 9 yards.
did you did you have dogs growing up?
I did
Okay.
actually. It really strange. Well, I think it's strange. I did. My earliest memories, I had a Norwegian Elkhound, and then after the Norwegian Elkhound, I had pretty much all Chow Chows, which, later in life as a dog trainer, everybody says, "Ooh, Chow Chows, ooh, Chow Chows," like they're, and that was always weird to me because I grew up with Chow Chows and I have nothing but amazing memories of them. They were, loving and easygoing and fun. And, so probably after the Norwegian Elkhound, there was maybe 5 Chow Chows. And then there were 2 when I left home. And then, when they passed away, I came back to be with one of them, at the vet's office and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, that was kind of it for a long time. I didn't have dogs after that for a lot of years, all through college, my early, careers outside of dog training and stuff like that. And then getting a dog again in my life was kind of like, I guess that would be the beginning of one of those epochs.
Okay. So timeline wise, when did you come back in? When did you get that dog? When did you come back into?
That was 2007. That was when I moved out to New York. So,
Okay.
not to
Was
bore you
that
guys
post
with
college?
geography. Yes, it was. So post college, I graduated from Southern Oregon University with a master's degree in teaching. And right out of college, I actually moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and I taught there for 4 years as an English teacher, a high school English teacher. And then at the time, my wife really wanted to move out of the heat of Arizona, and she wanted a Victorian house. I did too. And Victorian houses are cheap and abundant in upstate New York. So we came to New York, got a nice house in New York, and then, what's missing from a house? A dog.
Makes
So
sense.
we really kind of had always liked English bulldogs. We contacted a really great breeder, got an English bulldog, which is my English bulldog Dexter. That was in 2007, and man, that changed my life. I was like, the heck did I go so long without a dog? This is crazy. Like, I love this.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, okay, so you were teaching for a while. You had you have a master's in teaching,
Yep.
teaching for a long time. Is that what
Yep.
you had sort of thought that you were going to do with your life?
Yeah, I mean, really, honestly, that was kind of just. I mean, I was just going to be a teacher. I did teaching, and then my other gig was um, I had done art school too, and I was freelance illustrator and graphic designer on the side. I mean, just teaching was my main gig, and then I did that kind of on the side. And yeah, it was going to be those two things pretty much as far as I knew forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see the guitars behind you, or I assume that you're a musician, not just an admirer of the look of guitars.
Yeah, yeah, that was, I guess, that was another side hustle. When I lived in Arizona, I was in a band and we got signed to an indie label. We had a CD out. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I still dabble in music on the side. Yeah.
Alex and I have both done the band thing to varying degrees. We're both musicians as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, totally understand that life. So what was it that made the switch from teaching to full-time like dog training?
Yeah. So by the time, so in rapid succession, we got Dexter, and then we got involved with the Northeastern Boston Terrier Rescue. So then we fostered a Boston Terrier that we ended up keeping. We were foster fails. And then got another Boston Terrier. And so we had 3 dogs at the time, in addition to kind of a rotating cast of fosters that were coming in. And it was really cool. Like, I was all into the dog life. The big change came when my then wife actually left me and my daughter and went back to Oregon for an old boyfriend and started this really, as you might imagine, bitter and savage divorce. And it was hard. My mental health just went in the toilet. Like, I wasn't sleeping. I was hallucinating at work. I lost like 15 pounds in like 3 weeks, which is bananas. And it just got to a point where like my professional life at school was just garbage. I mean, kind of, they pulled me in the office and they're like, maybe this isn't right for you. And I'm like, maybe you're right.
Mm,
So it was like a mutual decision. And then, of course, I had to pay some bills. So I started just applying for jobs wherever I could. And one of the first places that called me was PetSmart. And I'm interviewing and they're like, you have a teaching degree? Like, we need a dog trainer. What do you think of that? And I'm like, well, that sounds pretty cool. And that was that. I got
mm,
hired. They sent me to their academy and came back, and I did that at that PetSmart for 6 years. I did that for 6 years, and then kind of got where I grew beyond the corporate thing. I'd gotten a bunch of certifications. My skills as a trainer had outgrown what they would allow me to do there. And so I felt like, you know what, it's time to move on. I built up a pretty good reputation in the community. So I felt reasonably certain that I could carry a business. And so I tendered my resignation, and the day after my last day, launched my website, and I haven't looked back since, man. It's been 5 years since then.
nice. Yeah. What do you feel like was the biggest thing that your mind changed about in terms of dogs or dog training when you started more formally, working with dogs, with the PetSmart job and going to their academy? Like, what was the biggest mind change for you?
Um, it's a really good question. I think it was just, I think it was interacting with dogs on a much deeper level than just, as a pet owner. I mean, I felt like, I mean, looking back, as a pet owner before I was a dog trainer, I can think of a lot of boneheaded things I did, that I'd be like, oh my gosh, I wish I could go back and say, I'm really sorry, that was dumb.
Mm,
Um, so understanding those things and understanding dogs on a much more, on a much deeper level, and appreciating them as individuals, and learning about myself. you know, as a human being. I know that sounds really, really corny. You know, they always say like, well, dogs bring out the best in you and stuff like that. And I'm like, I think it's absolutely true. You know, I think I'm a better person for working with dogs and learning about dog training and behavior. Um, and yeah, I think it's just, and I get to be a teacher too.
Hmm.
And I definitely like dogs better than teenagers.
Yeah. I mean, way to jump ahead to one of my later questions, that learning about yourself from dog training. What are the kinds of things that you learn about yourself by teaching other animals, and like what was some of that stuff?
Well, like, you know, developing patience. I think I feel, at least at my background as a teacher, has really helped me. How do I want to say this? Like ways that I can teach people about their dogs has taught me a lot about just navigating
Mm,
the world in general. You know,
yeah.
so developing that patience, learning how to interact with people, how to coach people. You know, I mean, you know, we talk about dog training as like it's a specific thing, but I mean, you have to understand that the deeper you get into these things, like applied psychology is applied psychology across the board. So all the things that make you a really good dog trainer make you a really good people person
Mm,
in general, you know? So I feel like just interpersonal skills, you know, methodology, you know, just kind of approaching things from almost like a process engineer standpoint.
yeah.
This work from this discipline? Does this work from this discipline? Okay, can we assemble those into something new and interesting that works in this particular context? Um, so I think the aptitudes have always been there, but just obviously, you know, honing skills and applying those as not just a trainer, but a human being, you know. I feel really corny when I say these things out
No,
loud.
I think you're right. So, I mean, in my experience anyway, and so I just got a dog for the first time in my life a couple of weeks ago. I'll have my wife bring the dog in maybe a little later, but we also just started working with preschool age kids in the last couple of months, and that's my first time doing anything like that. And I gotta say, it's a very similar experience in terms of like just the almost the training aspect of how do you get a kid to understand a routine, how do you get a kid to respond the right way to things. It's very similar, and we'll talk about some of the mechanics of dog training as well. It's a very similar experience for me to go home, and well, sometimes at work because we get to bring our dog to work. It's amazing. uh, it's a very similar experience to like go home, train with my dog, and be paying attention to these very specific things, and then go to work with these preschool age kids and see like that kid just did the same thing that my dog did in the like human version. And now I know what to do because I did the dog version yesterday. Let me switch that to the kid version and it works.
Yes,
It's
yes,
so interesting.
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think that you can recognize that insight is really important. Um, you know, people always say like, well, a dog's not a human, you can't treat him like a person, you know, and I always say like I said, applied psychology is applied psychology.
Hmm.
I think if I ever went back to the teaching profession, I thought I was a pretty good teacher, but I think if I ever went back to it, I would be way more effective as a teacher because of what I've learned from dog training. Exactly like you just said. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so with the start of your company, did you start the YouTube channel at the same time, or was that sort of a later thing?
It was pretty close. I mean, the company officially launched in November of 15. And so the YouTube, I think I had the first video up by January or February, I think.
Okay.
Pretty quick.
Yeah, that's definitely quick. What do you feel like you've learned about being a YouTube creator and sort of that part of your business and projects?
Well, I definitely see the value of it. Um, I mean, I don't think you can really undervalue if you want to be successful in the 21st century. I think you can do it without those things, but using and leveraging some aspect of social media as kind of some pillar content um, is how you really gain success. And the cool thing about it is in the 21st century, it's leveled the playing field because anybody with a smartphone has access to the same tools anybody else does. It's not like the elite club anymore. I mean, you're the 13-year-old kids or younger that are millionaires now because of social media. So um, I think understanding that and leveraging that has really allowed me to get my message out to more people than I could, 10, 15 years ago.
Do you primarily see the YouTube channel as like getting your message out, or is it more of a marketing funneling tool? Like how do you see the YouTube channel in relation to the rest of your business?
It's a really interesting question, Chase, because I really see those two things as inextricably linked, right? So I've had kind of an aversion to some of the marketing aspect because I really believe in what I do. I believe in my art. I believe in my message, and I want to serve and do good things with it. I want to add to the available store of goodness in the universe.
Yeah.
But I also understand that the marketing portion of it is absolutely necessary in order for that to happen, right? So I can't just sit in a vacuum chamber and hope that the goodness just radiates from there. So I see it as both of those things. I feel like that's a platform where I can reach literally millions of people and try to add something positive to dog training, no pun intended. But then I can also use that as a marketing platform that will allow me to do dog training more. That's important. I want it to be a career. I want it to be a lifestyle. I have bills to pay. So, it definitely does all of those things for sure.
Could you give just like a little pitch of your YouTube channel for anybody who in the audience who hasn't heard of it?
Yeah, sure. So, my dog training school's name is Simpatico Dog Training. It's like the Spanish word simpatico, just with the word paw in the middle. And so I I don't make videos as quickly as some content creators do, but I feel like that the videos I make are pretty high density stuff. So we do training videos where I talk about certain concepts. I try to show people how to do maybe kind of oblique strategies and things they maybe haven't seen before. I think there's a lot of people that, how to teach your dog to, how to potty train your dog or walk politely on a leash or, roll over and play dead. Everybody's doing those kinds of things. So I try to do things that are a little bit different. Hey, what should you do when you bring a new dog home? Hey, your dog is kind of fearful. Here's how you should approach those kinds of things. A few product reviews for things that I really believe in. And so we've got about 70 videos coming up on 300,000 subscribers. And it's a cool thing, I think. And I get to interact with people. I try to really spend time answering comments and questions reasonably. And
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed about your YouTube channel that I think is common to many successful YouTube channels that have this sort of interlinked YouTube business thing going on, I think is best described. Let me back up. A couple of months ago, we interviewed a guy named Sean Croxton. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he does a podcast called Quote of the Day.
mm-hmm.
And on his podcast, it's like a super high rated motivational podcast. But on his podcast, he put out this quote of someone telling a story called the Happy Meal mistake. And essentially, she was giving this talk at a business conference, telling this story about essentially an analogy for business, where many people think of doing business like this. They're giving out like the teaser version of what you get behind the paywall, and they wonder why they're failing. And so in order to illustrate this, she gives this analogy of like, imagine you're going on a first date. You know, you dress up really nice. You're New York City, right? You walk to the girl's apartment. You're like in a suit and tie. You know, you brought her flowers and everything. And, you know, you guys go on your date and you go to McDonald's. Well, it's just a first date, right? Like you gotta commit to get the steak dinner.
Right.
Well, of course not.
Right.
Nobody's gonna do that.
Right.
And yet in business, it's so common for people to like give, oh, here's the teaser thing, but just trust me, behind this paywall,
Right.
it's there, right? The steak dinner is there, but let me give you the Happy Meal because you're not paying. And one of the things that you are doing, you're giving this like depth of content that locks people's attention in such a positive way. They can tell you are genuinely conveying a message that you care about, that they care about by virtue of being there and trying to understand how to treat their dog better. And like as a marketing strategy, I mean, I'm just commending you on that. Somewhere
Well,
there's a
thank you.
question
I
in there.
appreciate that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. Honestly, it does. Because that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Book, when I very first started, I got to look and see what the, Michael Port, read a book called Book Yourself Solid, by Michael Port. And that, when I was, you know, getting ready to leave PetSmart, and I'm like, okay, I got to start my own thing. This has got to be successful because, you know, it's kind of scary. And that was one of his big things, was he just talked about, you got to give. And when you feel like you've given too much, give more. Because, you know, if you really believe in your message and you really believe that people need to hear it, it's exactly like you said, Chase. You can't lock the best stuff behind the paywall. You know, you've got to live, you got to walk the walk. Because there's plenty more where that came from, you know? Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Absolutely, like as you said.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, good to hear. I want to move into some dog training stuff.
Yeah.
First off, give me maybe an overview of the space of dog training. In my mind, it seems like there are a couple of prevailing ideas from professionals in the dog training world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have things like, should you train with treats versus without treats?
Mm-hmm.
Should you train like positive encouragement only, or should you have the mix of positive and negative? What do you see as sort of the prevailing methodologies, and where do you fall within that space?
Yeah, I can definitely tell you what the ideologies are. Where I fall in that space is much harder for me to pin down, which I don't mean that to sound like I'm avoiding the question, but I'll kind of tell you what I mean here. So
Sure.
I really look at the landscape of dog training. It's almost like Catholics and Protestants, you know, they're all reading the same book. They're all working on the same team, but they can't agree on a damn thing.
Yeah.
You know, so on the one hand, you have like the quote unquote positive reinforcement people, for lack of a better phrase. So those are all, you know, mostly food trainers, all about positive reinforcement, you know, praise, play, you know, treats, all that kind of stuff. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the label balanced trainers. And balanced trainers, you know, their idea is that, okay, so the seesaw is too heavy on one side. Let's balance it out so that we have both, you know, pain and pleasure. It's both praise and punishment. You know, we correct dogs if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, even though we may praise dogs. Those are probably the two biggest players, as your positive reinforcement people and your balance trainers on the landscape. Now, between those two camps, there's a tremendous radical middle ground and tons of splinter groups. So, you know, your positive people have your purely positive that never ever say a cross word to a dog. The force-free people, usually there's some crossover there. And then your balanced people, you've got everything from, you know, guys that are still hanging dogs up off the ground to, you know, some really super professional balance trainers that like, yeah, I use a prong collar as a finishing tool. We use it for 2 weeks and then it's all done, you know. There's a lot of really wonderful trainers in both camps and everywhere in between. And there's a lot of trainers I don't think should be anywhere near a dog on both camps and everywhere in between, you know. So it's very difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
As far as where I fall in that, I'm kind of slipping and sliding all over the place. I really feel that, you know, you get this kind of question where like, well, which one are you? Are you a Catholic or are you Protestant? You know? And I'm like, really, honestly, those are marketing terms and they don't really convey a whole lot other than just to pigeonhole a trainer in one of these two things. Because as soon as you identify as one, then the other camp is going to start shooting arrows at you. And I don't really like to do that, you know? So I'm like, am I a positive reinforcement trainer? Sure. Are there things that balance training does that I agree with and use? Sure. Are there, you know, things in between that I think are great? Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard for me to pigeonhole. I've been called purely positive and force-free by some of the balance trainers that hate me. And I'm like, I've never said I'm purely positive or force-free. You know, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I like to say I'm mostly positive reinforcement. I understand how operant conditioning works. I understand how classical conditioning works. I understand how, you know, applied behavior works. Science-based, but, you know, science-based is even another one of those marketing terms. You know, they're like, well, I'm a science-based trainer. Like, well, what does that mean? I mean, do you read peer-reviewed stuff or do you just do the things that Pinterest says are science-based, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It's hard.
I think moving forward, and maybe we should have done this earlier, I want to define a couple of terms real quick that come from the conditioning world.
Yeah.
And it's possible to slip from these specific definitions just because in common parlance, it's so easy to talk about something and use the words that come to mind. But in the conditioning world, for anybody who's not familiar, positive and negative don't convey reinforcement and punishment. Positive means you're giving something. Negative means you're taking it away.
Right.
And reinforcement means you are trying to encourage more of a behavior. And punishment means you're trying to discourage some sort of behavior. So you can have something like positive reinforcement, which I think everyone is familiar with. That's where, you know, the dog does something that you want, you give to the dog something that they want, whether it's praise or treats or whatever. You can also have something like positive punishment, which would be something like the classic, you know, rolled up newspaper swat on the nose, right? That is a positive punishment because the dog did something wrong and you are adding, that's the positive side.
Right.
You are adding negative reinforcement would be something like, I think something like a prong collar where essentially you've got something uncomfortable, and maybe a prong collar is not the perfect example of this, but you've got something uncomfortable that is going on. And then when the dog does something correct, you take away the discomfort, right? You take away, by taking something away, you've given the dog something that they want. And then negative punishment is where the dog does something wrong and you take away something they like.
Right.
So, negative punishment could be something like you're playing with the dog and they do something wrong, so you stop playing with them.
Right.
That's the negative
Right.
punishment. So
Right.
hopefully those terms make some sense. It's totally possible that in just speaking freely, we'll slip and use the wrong term, but
Well,
we'll
it
do as
happens a
much course
lot.
correction as we need.
It happens a lot. You see like on forums and stuff like that, I mean, really common you hear, like, well, I tried that positive reinforcement thing. I think it's time to use a little negative reinforcement, and all
Hmm.
the trainers in the room are like, I think what you mean is positive punishment,
Right.
And
Yeah.
then of course somebody pipes up, like, I don't think there's anything positive about it. And we're like, no. You don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's worth just talking about that just because there is that mix up. You're right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Now, I think it's so real quick, just to dovetail real quick. You use the example of a prong collar. Now, prong collar can be used for both positive punishment and negative reinforcement, depending on the way it's handled. So if a trainer were to give a quick pop correction, that would technically be a positive punishment.
Yep.
If there was sustained pressure on it in order to get a dog to stop, like pulling or something like that, and then that pressure ceased as soon as the dog stopped that behavior, then you would have your negative reinforcement there. So,
Yeah.
a lot of these things slip and slide back and forth between all four of the quadrants of operant conditioning very quickly. The other thing I would like to mention is, those four quadrants are spoken of very, very technically and diligently in training, but you got to understand that that stuff is the matrix code behind the universe. It's happening all the time in the environment, whether you realize it or not, and whether you like it or not. I mean, every time that you step out in the rain and you're like, oh, this sucks, I'm going to go back inside. That was positive punishment from the environment, or if you go to the kitchen and you're like, oh, I shouldn't have these Chips Ahoy, and then you eat the Chips Ahoy and you feel better about it. That's positive reinforcement for maybe a behavior that is not healthy. That's just how the universe operates for all organisms.
That's an awesome way to put that. The matrix code behind the universe. Good.
Yeah.
What are some common misconceptions people have in dog training? Like, what are the things that when you're working with clients or getting comments on YouTube, people seem to, need to change their minds about, or have some misconceptions about?
So some of the man, there's a there's a lot. It's like the FAQ.
Yeah.
So real quick, I would say there's a big misunderstanding about. We just talked about operant conditioning, which is your four quadrants: your positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment. And then there's your classical or your Pavlovian conditioning, which is totally associative, right? That's the stuff that's unconscious. You don't think about. That's like Pavlov's dogs and the bell, right? That's where we discovered that kind of thing, which is also happening all the time, whether you want it to. And it's also happening all the same time with operant conditioning. There's not very much understanding about some of the way that that classical conditioning works to change emotional responses. And so, you get a lot of times where a trainer like myself is talking about like, hey, let's condition the emotional response in a certain situation to help diminish fear or to diminish, stress behaviors or things like that. And then you get a lot of people coming in like, well, you're rewarding bad behavior. Like, okay, technically a little bit, yes, to some extent, but the timing's all over the place. The consistency's all over the place. Like, it's sloppy training. Like, if that's what you were trying to do, much stronger things are happening over here. And that's what we're focusing on. Like, if you get too hung up on every single tiny little barb in the equation, like, you'll never make any forward progress. So sometimes you just have to pick a job and plow through and get that job done. And then some of the smaller things work themselves out anyway, And I can get some examples of that if you want. some of the other things that you see misconceptions are about dominance. We call that the D word. I call it the D word. I think that it's really misunderstood by the general public and very liberally misapplied to a lot of behaviors. I mean, everything from puppy biting to leash grabbing to, barking or, reactivity. I mean, all these things, are usually attributed to dominance. And so dominance kind of gets scaled up way bigger than it really is. The dominance is a thing. It's just, I think the vast majority of the time that people are dropping the D word, like it's really not dominance at all.
Well, actually, can we stick on that one for a second? So
Yeah, sure.
That's one where I've heard a lot about that, and I've never. I think at one point somebody essentially just said, "Don't worry about, your dog and dominance," and like basically just don't pay attention to it. And so from that point on, anytime I saw that in a discussion when I was trying to figure out dog training stuff, I was like, all right, whatever, forget it.
Yeah.
But what is the conception that most people have of dog dominance hierarchies and how you fit into that?
Well, so the concept that most, I think, most dog owners have is that dominance is about ranking, right? That it's about like, especially when you start using the word hierarchy, that it's about a pecking order, so to speak, like it's the military rank. Like I'm at the top, you're next, and then this stuff, well, you're way at the bottom, and then that drive and that desire to create this ranking and this hierarchy starts to bleed over into other behaviors where it affects, dogs are trying to dominate their humans, or trying to dominate, the cat, or trying to dominate, other dogs in the house and things like that. And as you said, Chase, that's just really not the case in almost every situation you can think of. Dominance is a thing. It does factor into it. It's just, it's the salt in the stew. It's not the stew.
That's another good analogy. So, I mean, one of the ways that I think of it somewhat, so I've heard this as an analogy between dog psychology and human psychology before. And this is another aspect that I think rings true when I talk about my experience with preschool age kids and my experience, with dogs and learning about dog training, that there's an optimal ratio between how much you are competitive with your dog versus letting them win. So for example, if you're playing some sort of chase game where you are physically always capable of, say, keeping something away from them, there is a natural ratio that dogs can tune into it with some fudge room where they will get the most beneficial experience out of it. And if you watch dogs and other animals play naturally, you'll start to see that ratio emerge of a big dog who could very clearly physically dominate a smaller dog will let the smaller dog win a certain amount of times. Otherwise, the smaller dog's not interested in playing anymore.
Right. Exactly right. Exactly right.
First of all, it's the same with kids, but so is that, so you're saying, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, to use kids, like an analogy of kids, right? This is why grandpas let their grandkids win at checkers, because if grandpa just smears that kid every single time, the kid's not going to want to play, So, little Tommy makes a move and grandpa goes like, oh my gosh, that was a good one. I don't know what I'm going to do, and then the kid's invested in playing the next time, even though you and I both know that grandpa could wipe the board with him, Here's a great example in dog training: tug, right? So when we play tug with dogs, sometimes you let the dog win. So, if a dog is really into it and they're vigorous and they're doing the whole growl and shaking their head, so, sometimes they'll give me a good shake and I'll go along with it. I'll be like, oh my God, wow, you're so strong. Woo! Wow, man, because I want them to think that they have an effect on me. It makes it more fun for them.
Yeah.
And then part of the training is for a tug is, if I let you have the toy, I want you to bring it back to me. You know,
Yeah.
and if the dog brings it back to me, I know that they're invested in interacting with me. You know, so yeah, I mean, to your point, those are exactly, those are important pieces, especially during play, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I my specific experience with the kids is noticing that whenever we're running around outside and racing, there are certain kids who you got to let them win at certain ratios, and it's slightly different for each kid, but it's not that different.
Yeah.
Where if you stop doing that, like they're not interested in racing anymore.
Right.
They're done.
Right. You know,
Like,
why would
yeah,
I do this? Yeah. I'm
yeah,
just going to lose. This isn't any fun. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So, I mean, with strictly speaking about dominance, I mean, I think it's important for, you know, uh, your listeners, our listeners, to understand, you know, let's define it in a way that makes sense. And so dominance, strictly speaking, it's about uh, the distribution of resources, resolving the distribution of resources in a non-violent way. And that's very important to understand. So if you look at dominance in the wild, it's a look, or it's a body posture, or it's maybe, you know, the stink eye or a lip curl, you know. So let's say a wild animal has a kill and one of the other ones comes sauntering up. Well, I'll take a piece of that. I'll take some of that. And the other one goes like, no, you're not. And then if it's been established in that group, then the second one goes like, all right, all right, all right. I'll come back later, you know. Non-violent resolution of the distribution of resources. The thing to understand is that dominance is only practiced with conspecifics, and conspecifics means that they're members of the same species. So wolves don't try to dominate foxes. Wolves dominate other wolves. Dogs don't try to dominate, you know, everybody in the neighborhood. They try to dominate other dogs. Now, the thing is that dominance is a non-violent conflict resolution. As soon as violence comes into it, that is unhealthy coping. That's called dominance aggression. That's not a sound survival technique, right? You don't see wolf packs fighting all the time because they wouldn't survive if they were fighting all the time. They have to cooperate. So it's the same thing, you know, if you see a dog that's resource guarding, you know, and starting to like snap and lunge and bite people if they get close, that's violent conflict resolution. That's not really dominance anymore. That's dysfunctional. And that's where we have to step in and be like, you're really struggling with this. You are way too intense about this. Like, I don't want your stupid food. Let's work through this problem together. And so, you know, if once you kind of start looking at things like that, I think approaching it in a more supportive, cooperative way just kind of becomes a natural solution, instead of saying like, you're going to dominate me. Well, pal, I'm going to dominate you even harder, you know, and then you just get into this arms race, and, you know, either you're going to win by completely, you know, destroying that dog's personality, or you're going to lose when the dog takes an arm off.
Speaking of dogs' personalities, how much of a dog's behavior, you know, kind of the classic nurture versus nature thing, right? How much of their behavior is subject to change, and how much does that vary across, you know, different dogs?
That's a really great question, Alex. So the findings in behavior are that it's really a matter of nature because of nurture. So genetics absolutely plays a part in it, but that's what we call a distant antecedent. You know, genetics are not an absolute. You know, certain genes are switched on and off depending on input from the environment. So nature and nurture are hand in hand. They're both very important things. Now, you know, genetics stacks the deck. If you have a dog that comes in with really poor genetics, that means that the nurturing becomes even more imperative and or more difficult. And, you know, the opposite is true. If you have a dog with very strong stable genetics, that makes the nurturing component much, much easier. And you see this all the time in dog training. There's, as a trainer, I'm like, hey guys, listen, you get a new dog, you got to do A, B, and C. And then somebody pipes up like, listen, my last dog, I didn't do any of that crap, and he was the most amazing dog on the planet. I'm like, you won the genetics lottery. That is not the norm. So play the numbers game. It doesn't hurt anything to do the good stuff anyway.
How much would you say there, this might be kind of a tricky question because I don't know we have the answer to any of the questions that would come before it, but is there a higher percentage of dogs' behavior that can be modified versus a human's, right? Because when I think of people, we seem to really value a lot of diverse type of traits, right? But when we're interacting with dogs, it seems like there is at least a very core group of, traits, whether it's responding to commands, especially in the way that we interact with them. Would you say that there's, I guess my question is there a higher percentage of the dog's behavior that can be trained than it can with the humans? Or do we just have more control over their environment and situation than we are able to with humans?
Honestly, the latter, what you said there, that we have more direct control over their environment, and dogs are less, dogs have emotions, but they're less emotionally invested in some of those things than humans are. Humans, we are dumb emotional animals. We hang on to things, and we have, we hold grudges, and we, have tempers and hurt feelings and stuff. And dogs have some of that to some extent, but they live so much more in that vertical dimension of time. There's so much more in the moment. It's much easier, as you said, to kind of turn a lot of that stuff around than it is with a human.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned before good, stable genetics. What is the difference that you see between dogs with a kind of early onset of their personality or traits, and how early do you start to see that?
You can start seeing some of that stuff pretty early. Probably the most obvious example of that is in your German Shepherds. So German Shepherds, have this amazing reputation throughout history. They participated in both the world wars. There's pictures of them, and accounts of them in the earliest days doing, all sorts of amazing things. So police dogs, military dogs, they're great. However, you really see this divergence in the 21st century, where you have these amazing European lines where these dogs, just come with all the pre-installed software. They're ready to rock. They're, if you give them the correct training, they're confident, they're stable, they're precise, they're constant, they're intense. They're everything that, when you think of a German Shepherd, you would want. But because of their popularity, now you have this sudden influx of people that want pet German Shepherds. And so now you're getting all these splinter, specifically American lines. And because the breeding now is getting diluted and there's not as much care paid to it, now you're starting to see all of these really twitchy, neurotic German Shepherds that are very prone to reactivity, to aggression, to anxiety, to distress. And then along with the selection pressure that's placed on their genetics with the kind of sloppy breeding, now you're also seeing hip dysplasia, arthritis, other kinds of internal problems and things like that, just because of that split in the genetics, So it makes for a very tough situation for owners and trainers alike. But I think that, that kind of speaks to what you were asking about, where you start to see that, like in German Shepherd puppies, you start to see it real early. If they're going to have hip problems, they've got that really weird crouchy back end, as early as like 16, 18 weeks. When you really start to see a puppy's socialization crystallize in that, 12 to 16 week kind of golden age right there. A lot of those German Shepherds, you start to see things, or I do, a good trainer with a good eye start to go, you better keep an eye on that and be really proactive with that stuff, because it'll metastasize into something bad if you are not on top of it. And that's a lot of the problem, is that owners don't know what they're looking for, don't know how to recognize it, and they don't take it seriously enough to really stay on top of it. To kind of circle around to one of your other questions about, are some of these things easy to change? Some of those things are, if you have kind of junk breeding, you can still do a lot with good proactive training, especially from a puppy, to turn those things around and still have a wonderful companion dog. Absolutely. They just don't. And so there's your nature because of nurture, and you switch on the wrong kind of sequence of genes, and now all of a sudden you've got a 3-year-old dog that has been rehomed 6 or 7 times, is in the shelter and rescue system, and may eventually leave a shelter out the back door, if you catch my drift. And that sucks, man. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Have you done work with working dogs as well as household dogs? Like, have you worked in both of those fields, or do you primarily do sort of household companion dogs?
So not much. I have worked with some really world-class working dog trainers, and they've helped me develop my training system a lot. So a lot of the stuff that I use was actually developed by working dog trainers. That said, I don't have a lot of hands-on experience with working dogs, partly because of lack of opportunity, but also because I kind of decided early on that I really wanted to focus on pet dogs. I feel like that's just kind of unaddressed. And this is totally my opinion. I just feel like a lot of trainers get into training because they're into training, so they come from competition backgrounds. A lot of your balanced guys come from Schutzhund or Mondio Ring or IPO. A lot of your positive people come from agility and rally and flyball and things like that. And so they come from these competition or showing backgrounds. And that's great. If that's what you're into, that's wonderful. But then I see that they pile a lot of stuff onto your regular pet dog owner that they just don't need. It overwhelms them. It's more than a pet dog needs. A pet dog is not an Olympic level athlete or a military grade worker. A pet dog is your buddy. They just need to navigate the world politely and confidently. And let's be honest, there are way more pet dogs in the world than there are working or competition dogs. And so I made a decision early on that I was really going to focus my work on pet dogs, because I feel like them and their owners need just practical, accessible, easily executed help that they may not get from, your average competition or working dog trainer. Not to denigrate those people. There's wonderful trainers in those camps, but the focus is on, if you hire a cop to design your exercise routine, it is going to be way more intense than your local gym guy that's like, hey, you want to shed a few pounds for your wedding? Like, I'll help you do that. You don't need to do a trillion push-ups.
So one of the first books that I read on dog training, which was probably a year and a half before I even got a dog. This is when I knew I wanted a dog, but at that point, it was just not ready to happen. I read Mike Ritland's book, Team Dog. Are you familiar with Mike Ritland? I think his company is Tricos. So he was a Navy SEAL dog trainer, and he wrote this book, Team Dog, to sort of translate some of his experience with working dogs into, the household pet world, and just relay some of his things. Maybe you can speak to any of his style specifically, but my more general question is, what is the major difference from the training side in how you'd work with a dog from the for household versus working, or like you even mentioned, sport and competition
Hmm.
type dogs? Like what do you do differently training wise? Is it just a matter of content? Like instead of, training your dog to sit, you're training them to sniff out bombs? Or is there something specific that is like vastly different?
Well, I think probably the biggest difference is just the level of precision that's necessary, and the inventory of things that a dog has to know, right? So if you're doing like Schutzhund competition, right, protection training, or you have a working dog that's working for police or for the military, behaviors have to have a high level of precision and reliability, right? So let's take healing, for example, right? Healing has to be pretty darn on point. You get those focus heals or a contact heal in different contexts. The dog has to be able to deploy behaviors from that heal, uh, it, it, you know, with a high level of speed, precision, and reliability. And that's true for whether you're just doing, sport or, the high level working stuff. Now, if you just want your buddy to go to the farmer's market with you, are we teaching a dog to heal? Yes, we're teaching a dog to heal. Are we teaching a dog to be able to deploy different behaviors? Yes, we're teaching a dog to be able to deploy different behaviors. But the inventory of behaviors that dog needs are way lower, and the level of precision doesn't need to be as high, right? So I can, if you want your dog to heal with you at the farmer's market, we can absolutely do that. And it'll look nice and it'll be really mannerly. We don't need a contact heel or a focus heel. That's Olympic level competition stuff. And that takes a long time, a lot of training, and dedicated, focused work to do. And most owners, I mean, for crying out loud, they barely teach their dog anything more than sit and shake. They just are not going to put the time into a contact heel. So I'm like, listen, let's get your buddy to walk politely next to you and not pull. And we'll call that good, right? Then the owner feels good about training. They feel good about their dog. They feel like that they can do this, that it's something they can be successful and doable, and they're excited about like learning more. And then they take their dog to do things with them. Whereas I feel like if we just put that expectation of the speed and the precision and the reliability, one request every time, 100% of the time, people and dogs burn out unless that's what they want to do. You know, I've seen it. I've just seen it a lot of times. People wash out of training programs, and and I quite like, okay, so what was it about the training? I'm like, it's just, oh my God, nothing was good enough, and nothing. I have to keep correcting my dog to do this and that, and then we had to learn this, and then we had to learn that, and we had to learn. I'm like, okay, listen, let's just pick like 4 or 5 things. We'll get good at those 4 or 5 things. Doesn't have to be 100% of the time, just as long as your dog pays attention to you and, knows when to quit. People are like, yeah, I can do that. So, I mean, I don't mean that to make it a pitch about, my particular training, but that's the difference between those two worlds, at least in my view, is the level of precision and the drive that you have to reach that level of precision. Most pet dog owners they don't have it.
What are some traits that pet owners should look out for in their own dogs, or potentially other dogs that their dogs are interacting with? So just almost like a PSA type style, what are some things to look out for if a dog's showing aggression or seems, what are some traits that you should keep an eye out for your dog's safety or other dogs or your own?
Well, that's pretty broad. I mean, anytime you see just kind of an inordinate level of intensity, you should kind of check that. If it's meeting another dog, we don't want. I like dogs to be interested in interacting with other dogs, and dogs should spend time with their own kind. We don't want dogs dysfunctionally obsessed with other dogs. We get dogs that are way too doggy, and then at the exclusion of all the people. You know, just kind of obsessiveness, things like that. You should look for, one thing that you should really look for as a pet dog owner are, the technical term is a stereotypy. But basically a stereotypy is just a repetitive, meaningless activity. So pacing, vocalizing, excessive digging, excessive chewing, you know, especially if those things develop into inappropriate behaviors. Those are things that if you don't address those typically metastasize into pretty big behavior problems, and sometimes lifelong, because they'll actually start changing the chemistry of the brain.
Mm.
You see that in shelter dogs a lot. That's something that we really look for in the shelter, is stereotypies. You know, if you see a dog that just starts pacing, and they're all rooted in natural behaviors. I mean, you know, walking around, exploring your environment, that's a natural behavior. As soon as a dog just starts pacing nonstop, that's dysfunctional. That's unhealthy. You know, chewing is absolutely natural in a dog. It's soothing. It's emotionally satisfying. As soon as it starts to become obsessive, you know, something is off kilter in that dog's life. They're struggling with something. Vocalizing, you see that a lot, like excessive barking, dogs that just, you know, again, starts natural. Is a dog barking because they want something? Is a dog barking because they're alarming you about something? Is a dog, you know, barking because they're playing? And then you get to where dogs just, it's like they're barking to fill air pockets in their brain, and it's nonstop. You know, that's a dysfunctional behavior. Something is off. They're struggling. So those are things that, you know, the sooner you catch those and you kind of raises an eyebrow, that's when you should start to loop in a professional.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you think that, so one of the other pieces of advice that I really took in from, again, that same first dog book that I read was really look at things from a dog's perspective. If you have a dog in New York City, like I do, and you go outside and they're not listening to you, like understand that New York City has every possible sound you can imagine and every possible smell you can imagine all at once. And for dogs, sounds and smells are such primary senses that that's overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, you know, essentially rework the way that you're thinking about your environment when you're interacting with your dog, so that you understand the reason they're not listening to you isn't because they're being disobedient. It's because you just brought them into, you know, a New York City street, and all of a sudden they smell everything and hear everything. And like that particular situation, they're not used to. Like, you have to work through things from a dog's perspective.
Yeah. It's like trying to read poetry to somebody at a rock concert.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, to kind of loop back around to one of both yours and Alex's earlier questions, you know, that's another thing that I think a lot of dog owners really, really struggle with, is just that they don't manage a gradient of incoming stimuli, of distractions. You know, they kind of go, okay, well, I taught my dog how to do this in the kitchen, and they went outside, he doesn't listen to me. Like, okay, well, here's your point A and here's your point B, and you have to chop that up into segments and attain proficiency in each segment. If you're struggling, you need more segments. You know, that's actually a conversation I have almost verbatim like that, almost daily with dog owners.
In my experience, one of the things that I noticed with our dog was, for the first probably week and a half, 2 weeks, probably about 2 weeks, we were doing all of our training with her sitting down. And then I stood up and I was trying to show my wife, oh, like we really drilled this thing today. She's got it down. It's great. And I was trying to show it to her standing up, and the dog was like, I don't know what you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I sat down and she did it perfectly. And I was like, of course.
She was like, oh yeah, there we go. That's how we do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Generalizing is, that's
a lot
of what
generalizing. Yeah. There's a, I don't know where this phrase came from, but I've always used it in my training. I don't know who first said it, but it's, if if you train your dog in the kitchen, you get a great kitchen dog.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I have to run this analogy by you. So, to give a little bit of context, this meetup, 52 Living Ideas, that our podcast is situated in,
Mm-hmm.
is a multi-topic meetup. It started in New York. We used to meet every Saturday, and we would get anywhere from like 20 to 80, sometimes 100 people every Saturday to talk about ideas in psychology and philosophy, and all of these amazing things to get people together to talk about. And one of the books that we read was Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Are you familiar with that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky were these researchers that did a whole bunch of psychology research, and Kahneman wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is essentially distilling a bunch of his work into talking about two systems for human cognition. You have your fast system, which is automatic. He calls that system one. And it's automatic, it's quick, it's not deliberative at all. It's essentially the system that makes up your habits and things that we call like muscle memory, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then system two is slow and deliberate. It takes a lot of effort. So thinking fast would be the part of your brain that processes something like 2 + 2. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody immediately in their minds just went, oh, 4. Like, you didn't process that. It's just part of your natural reaction to 2 + 2 now, and it can be trained. But thinking slow would be something like multiply 236 times 47. Well, now you've got to either write it out, or you can line it up in your head and your process, and that's the slow deliberative system 2 part.
Right.
And we were coming up with a couple of analogies, and Shrikant, who you met at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
said, well, it's like a child and an adult. And the child is like system 1. They're, just sort of feeling the world, very automatic. And the adult is deliberative. And I said, well, no, I think it's more like a dog and a trainer. A dog is almost pure instinct and conditioning, right? It's all automatic and responses to the environment and cues. And the trainer is the one who's making deliberative decisions, who's doing the slow math, the system 2 math. And if you want system 2 to incorporate more of that work, like, you can train it. You got to train it. You can't just ask it. You have to condition it and, set up that, cue routine response or cue routine reward loop. And you can offload a lot to system 1, but not everything.
Mm-hmm.
Some things are always going to be system 2 tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Does that analogy ring true with you? Do you think I'm on the right track there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can definitely, I haven't called it that, but I feel like I've described it in about as many words to anybody who listened to my sciencey shtick. I definitely feel like a good amount of training is moving dogs through those levels, like that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, they're just like, why do I have to think about this? Like, why does it matter?
Yeah.
And then you show them like, hey, it's in your best interest. But this way, really great things happen. Life rewards, all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of good stuff happens. And then, as we talked about, it's a matter of moving those things. I think you called it system 1, where a lot of those things start to just happen as a matter of habit through repetition, and good conditioning. Yeah, it's a really cool analogy. I'm actually going to check out that book. That sounds really interesting.
It's good. It's deceptively big. So, it's, I don't know. Some people, when they see the thick book, they're like, I don't know if I want that. But it's totally worth diving into some of the ideas. Like, you don't even have to read the whole book.
What was it called?
Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I can, I'll send you a link to it as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. That's really intriguing. I like that a lot. Yeah.
So one of the other questions, one of the last questions on my list here before we move on is, can dogs be good judges of human character? You hear that, well, my dog, barks at dishonest people, or whatever the trope is. How true do you think that is? Is that something, if it is true, is that something that dogs naturally pick up on? Like, what's going on when people talk about dogs as a judge of character?
Um, I don't think it's quite as magical as people would like to believe. It's not like, everybody talks about how charming Jeffrey Dahmer was, and it's not like Jeffrey Dahmer's going to walk in a room and some dog's going to be like, whoa, now wait a second. It's not quite, it's not quite that, Sherlock Holmesian, but they definitely see part of a dog's, again, I say this a lot, pre-installed software is about reading body language. Now, one of the cool things about, if you read about dog evolution, is as dogs have split away from other canines, they've developed systems and behaviors that have no other function except interacting with humans. So there are things that dogs do that they don't even do with other dogs, right? Really, really cool stuff. So that means that dogs are not only great at reading other dogs' body language, but very quickly into their early stages, they get really good at reading humans' body language too. So a lot of that stuff comes from reading somebody's body language. And I don't mean just necessarily the person in question. They start picking up clues from everybody else in the room. So Gavin de Becker wrote this really great, it's a classic book called The Gift of Fear. And he talks about how, there's that kind of caveman part of your brain that's decoding environmental signals, whether or not you realize it. And so I think a lot of those things that manifest in your body, your dog picks up too, right? So if you get into a situation and that part of your brain is like, something's up, your dog goes, a light just went off on their dashboard. I don't know if they saw it, but hey guys, hey, is this thing on? And I feel like, in the situations that people talk about, like, I don't know how the dog knew and we all didn't know. My working hypothesis is that something in that person's body language, first off, was like, question mark. And then everybody else in the room, they were like, okay, all their little lights went off too. I'm not so sure about you, cowboy, Now that depends on the dog too, if you have a dog that's kind of been conditioned to enter new situations cautiously, whether you intended that to happen or not, maybe that's a nature versus nurture thing for that particular dog and their genetics. Some dogs pick those things up, differently than others, My goofball clowns are so outgoing and friendly. I think Jeffrey Dahmer could have probably kidnapped all four of them with a single cheeseburger. So,
Yeah, I think your point about the reading the body language resonates for my experience with my dog. He definitely can't tell if he loves everybody, even if they're, basically evil, I think.
Yeah.
He can pick up on people's anxieties or fear, that type of stuff. It seems like, something where there's a physiological human reaction that would be measurable to him in some way.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's sensing any like malevolence that's not expressed in some form.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly right. Yeah, I think you said that really well, Alex. Yeah. And I can remember times even like, not to revisit bad stuff, but, during my divorce, there was some really, really down times, where I was curled up in a fetal position in a closet, and here comes Dexter, pokes his head in, and he goes like, okay, and just curls up right next to me and he's like, I'm just going to say with you, I know it's what you need right now. He could tell. He's like, you're really upset right now. You just need a buddy.
Yeah. I think so. Before we move to the off topic and Q&A, I want to add one thing in here, and it's actually going to be one a question for me and Alex that I want you to respond to, and it's going to involve introducing our dogs. So Alex and I talked about this a little bit before. Alex, if you want to pull Teddy out and introduce him, the question is, what is one, if you have any overarching behavioral thing that you've noticed
Oh,
about
look at that
Teddy,
guy.
do you have any questions about how to interact with him about, I'm distracted by the dog now.
I know, right? Me too. Hi, Teddy. Oh my God, what a cutie.
Essentially one question about, Teddy, or what you should be doing with him, whether it's training or anything that Ian may be able to respond to.
Oh yeah, so I definitely have a question for Teddy. He's got a question actually. Um, so first of all, he's a odd mix. His dad was a Maltese and his mom was a pit bull.
Wow.
We did a DNA test to confirm that. So
Yeah.
pretty stocky and fluffy. But he has a I don't know if I'd call it a sexual dysfunction, but he every night at the same time he basically chomps his own privates and just humps his face for about an hour. And we've talked to the vet about it, and they don't really know. It's a nightly thing. They think it's just like a pleasurable activity for him, but they don't know if it came from, he was a rescue, so he was neutered super early, or if there was any kind of things like that. So I don't know if you have any insight as to if that's he doesn't have any other behavioral issues, so, and it's a time thing, like every evening at like 9 p.m. So I don't know if you have any insights.
Interesting. Well, if we follow the so-called humane hierarchy, we first thing in any behavioral question is health and wellness. If you've been to your vet and there's no clearly diagnosable, impetus behind it,
Yeah.
and it's not causing any problems, he's not, it's not making him all like weirdly inflamed or anything down there.
No, he's
Perfectly okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so then you can check that one off. Then I don't know, man. That's a new one for me. I mean, I know that dogs do what's called if they're stressed out, they do what's called the urogenital checkout. But usually that lasts like a couple seconds, maybe 5 seconds tops. You said he kind of goes to town for an hour.
Yeah, until he gets tired out, basically. And it seems like it's a sexual thing. He'll hump things, but he can't get a grip on them, so he'll just use his flexibility.
Okay.
My grandma's funeral at the after. I was going to call
no.
Of course.
after party, but that doesn't sound like the right term. The after the funeral, the get together for the family, he went in the center of the room and just started doing it.
In the center of the room.
It was a much needed respite. So it was funny for everybody. So,
well, I mean, my best guess right now would be that it's kind of a daily decompression, stress reliever, maybe, which would probably give some explanation why he did that in the middle of the funeral. If everybody's standing around and he's like, there's a whole lot of people stressed right now, like I really need to just release some of this pressure. Of course he has no sense of propriety. It's like, what's everybody's problem, and why you guys been out of shape about this? Like, well, how come you guys aren't all doing this?
I think he liked the laughter. I think he liked the attention.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if it's not hurting him, if there's no health detriment to it, and it's not and it's not becoming overly obsessive, you know, like if it's just one time a day at a predictable time, like, okay, we can live with that. You know, if I would say, honestly, Alex, that'd be one of those things that you just kind of keep a long-term eye on, you know, if you're like, it's kind of getting to like 90 minutes now, or it's like, wait, how come he's doing it twice a day? You know, that's when you got to start really looking deeper into things and maybe kind of teasing out some other
Sure.
kind of fix.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. I wish I had a stronger answer for you on that one. That's a new one. I mean, that would take, you know, like a old fashioned, you know, behavioral analysis and stuff. You know?
It's since he was pretty young, 4 months old, maybe.
Interesting.
Oh.
You said he was neutered super young and was a rescue too.
Yeah, he was one of 9 that were. 6 of them died. 2 of them were delivered to the Humane Society, but he was super sick, so they were going to put him down if they took him. So the local vet actually just took him in, and like we will nurse him back to health. So they took care of him, trained him for a month, and then we came and picked him up. So
Yeah. And you said he's always done it.
yeah, I mean, ever since maybe 4 months after we got him. Maybe he was like 6 months old. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting conundrum. I would, if if you find out more about that, loop me in. I'd be interested in hearing more about that. I add that to my case files. Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. Okay, well, I just had my wife bring in our 11-week-old mini golden doodle Liberty.
11 weeks old.
She is.
Oh my God.
Liberty, look up. Hey. Yeah, there she is.
Hi,
So,
beautiful.
she is very new. So a little bit of her story. We got her from a farm where they bred her, and I think they do like pretty small scale breeding of a couple of dogs. She's a little squirrely right now. And for the first week, it was when we were getting married. We had her at my parents' place in Michigan. She had a little bit of a different environment, different set of people, and then we brought her here to New York City, where she's been for the last 2-ish weeks. So she's now about at the 11-week mark, and she's awesome. Seems to be super smart. She's taking to all the training that we've done really, really well. We're working a lot on impulse control and doing a lot of play. But the one thing that seems strange about her is that she is extremely, and I mean extremely, picky about food. The only thing that we've gotten her to consistently eat is freeze-dried raw, and mostly she likes the chicken more than anything else. We've tried, I mean, until last week, she didn't even like peanut butter or anything like that. There are essentially no on the market treats that we've tried that she will take. Right now, we've been using the like Stella and Chewy's freeze-dried raw meal mixer things as treats because we know she eats that. And unless we mix that in with her kibble, she won't eat anything else. So is that normal? Is that something she'll grow out of? Or is that like a behavioral thing we should be paying attention to? Should we be doing something different? Like what's up with that?
Yeah, good question. So it is a behavioral thing, definitely. It's not the end of the world, but it's something I just, I mean, I work, a lot of my students and clients, we have this similar conversation. So, you know, I always lead off by saying, first of all, a strong hunger drive is absolutely normal, right? So take a look at a dog objectively. A dog is an opportunistic scavenger descended from predators, right? So they don't hunt anymore, they're scavengers. As such, though, they're designed for a system of gorging and fasting. And because they're opportunistic, you know, there's a certain component of their brain that says, if an opportunity presents itself, don't waste it, right? So, you know, food doesn't just jump in your mouth. You have to forage and scavenge and find it. And when you find it, you better demolish it because it might be a while before your next one. So we skip ahead a few centuries, you know, and now we have pet dogs, and they're like, nah. You know, it's like, that is not a natural state of being. You know, it's not a personality quirk. It's just like, that is contrary to your wiring.
Right.
So you will move a lot faster in, you know, your training and just in your management in general if you can reawaken that hunger drive and get back to that state where it's a valuable commodity, and she has to go through you to get it. So let me ask you this, Chase. Tell me about your feeding routine. What's that look like?
Yeah, so we've essentially been trying to do about 3/4 to 1 full cup a day of kibble, but it ends up being a little squirrely because we've been using these meal mixers, and you know, based on how much we're training or you know how much we're trying to feed her, it's been a little inconsistent on the amount.
Okay.
Timing, however, has been very consistent. We feed her 3 times a day. We were doing 4, but we've been shifting to 3. First thing in the morning, sometime around 7 to 7:30. It's usually a little bit after wake up time. In the middle of the day, right around 12:30 to 1. Usually, I mean, the windows in which we feed her are usually about this like half-hour block where it's like, you know, sometime between 12:30 and 1, sometime between 7 and 7:30.
Yep.
And then we were for a while doing 5:30 and 9:30 in the evening, but we've been trying to squish that into one, more like 8 p.m. So it's 3. It was 4. Now it's transitioning into 3 times per day.
Got it. That's good.
Essentially trying to evenly distribute that about a cup of kibble across those feeding times. And again, she won't eat it if it's not, you know, covered in the meal mixer stuff.
Okay. So I assume you put this in a bowl and then set the bowl down, and then what did she do?
Yeah, so usually she's pretty excited about the bowl, and when we put it down, if it's got the meal mixer stuff in it, she'll go to town. If she can, she'll eat around the kibble, but usually it's mixed well enough that she ends up eating the kibble anyway. And usually she leaves just a tiny little bit in the bowl when she's done. I have been asking her to, or I have been essentially reinforcing not barking for the food. When I would get the bowl out and fill it, like she knows what's going on. She's got that. And then when I move over to put the bowl down, if she starts barking, I'll put the bowl back, leave the room for a minute, and then I'll come back and try again. And it's gotten to the point where most of the time she doesn't bark. She gets excited and then she sits, and then I'll put the bowl down and say, okay. And, you know, she goes toward the food. I try to fit so I kind of like okay as like a release term or release command. So I've been trying to fit that in like right when I catch she's about to move toward the bowl, so she just gets used to hearing okay and moving at the same time.
I mean, is that pretty much how all 3 of the feedings go?
Most of the time. You know what, actually it's a little bit different when we've got her at work with the kids. So 3 days a week she's at work with us with the kids. And so on those days, one of the feedings, that 12:30 middle of the day feeding, is a little bit different. She's in a totally different environment, and it's a different bowl. But as far as how much she eats, what would you say? I think she usually leaves more when we're there. But.
Well, okay. So it sounds like she's at least, if you put food down, she's invested enough in it that she goes and she at least eats. Sounds like most of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she's a better judge of what she needs to eat than we are. You know, even though, you know, we pick up the dog food bag and says, "No, it says I'm supposed to feed this much," and she's like, "I don't want that much. I don't need that much." If she's eating, I would say just put less in the bowl. you know, just kind of tailor it for what she needs. I mean, her body will tell you what she needs. However, stick to your routine. You know, I usually recommend set a timer for 10 minutes. If you're doing a bowl feeding, 10 minutes, whatever's left in the bowl at 10 minutes, it comes back up, and that's it. It's gone forever. Don't put it back in a bag or anything like that. Like, it's gone. Usually if I get this question, this is a dog that'll just turn their nose up and just walk away from it, you know, or these are dogs that are free fed and stuff like that. You've got a routine, you've got a schedule, which is fantastic. That's great. You're already in the top tier with a good routine.
Good to hear.
And then I would just say, you know, just be really just consistent about the hours that the cafeteria is open. Just be like, I'm gonna put it down, 10 minutes later, it comes back up. Like, if you got your fill, great. If you didn't, guess you'd be hungry at lunch. And really just stick to the schedule. If she's fairly food motivated in that respect, you know, you can always experiment with some really super easy work to eat projects. You know, maybe instead of a bowl, maybe she, you know, does some forage feeding. You could just scatter it on a mat, or, you know, in a muffin tin, or on a Frisbee upside down, you know, or something like that. So she kind of have to pick around at it. It's a little more interesting. Just depends on what her frustration tolerance is. You know, some dogs are like, if it's not like right there that I can eat it, like, I don't want to do that. And that's something you have to cultivate. But I mean, it sounds like she's eating, you know, at least at each meal. If she leaves a little bit, just pick it up.
Okay.
I'd say, you know, I don't think it's too critical right now. I just don't like to see a dog that's, you know, if you spend the money on the raw food and you put it down and she's like, I don't want any of that crap. You're kind of like, yeah, like, I'm not going to put up with that. No. You eat what I serve, Peanut.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the big thing has just been like, you know, at first we got a couple of different kinds of treats, and we ended up giving them to one of our friends because, I mean, it was like these cool bacon and peanut butter things, and she just totally turned up her nose.
Yeah.
This, you know, rabbit, that's this other stuff, doesn't matter. Unless it's like this specific stuff, she won't eat it. But when we put that specific stuff down, she will eat it. It seems like she's got a normal appetite when it's the right stuff. Yeah. So, but you wouldn't worry about that otherwise?
Not right presently. There's a few other things that you can do though. Like, you know, if you know that you're going to do some training later on, you can withhold some of the breakfast, you know, so it's not like you're starving her. She's just going to get less to eat for breakfast so that she's more invested in the food that she's getting during a training situation, you know. The other thing you can do with those training treats, you know, if she's like turning her nose up at those, a really big part of my particular training system that, again, I learned from protection trainers, is to treat the food like a toy. So I always make dogs chase the food. Like I would say, you know, a lot of training has the food, you push it at the dog, like sit, the dog sits, and then you push the food at the dog. And I never do that. Like, if I say sit and that bottom hits the ground, I mark it, yes, and then I take a couple steps back and that dog has to come get it. So that makes the act of acquiring the food more stimulating and more interesting and essentially more rewarding. And I've had a lot of dogs come into my school, you know, where the owner says like, oh, he doesn't like training treats. Right away, I start rocking through a whole ton of training treats, and they're like, what? Why don't you do that at home? Because we've just made it more interesting for the dog to, you know, to work for it.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate that. Okay. So, sorry, now she's making noise. She found an antler chew on the ground. Okay, cool. Well, here's what we'll do next. Let me put my headphones back in. We will go on to the off topic and follow that up with some audience Q&A, wrap up after the Q&A. So for the audience that's still here that would like to ask any questions, feel free to either post your questions in the chat, and we will, when it comes to Q&A time, we'll call on you one by one. You can ask your own question, or you can just post an exclamation point and we'll call on you then. A couple of rules for questions. As always, make sure to keep your questions brief. We're not asking for your life story. We just like some, you know, good, deep questions that we can engage on. Keep them on topic. And please be courteous. As always, feel free to disagree with anything and anyone as long as you're being courteous about it. And additionally, we won't allow any follow-up questions unless Ian says, oh, is that answering your question? Or can you clarify this or that? Ian will be the dictator of whether you get to follow up. So that's how Q&A will work. As you think and prepare your questions, Ian, the off topic. So this is a chance for our guests to come in, talk about something that's not directly related. It can be tangentially related to their wheelhouse topics. It can be heavy or light. It can be serious or fun. We'll spend maybe 5 minutes on it. What do you have for us?
Something off topic. Well, I read your suggestions. Man, I don't know. I have so many things I'm into that I like. I would say, since we're on the topic of dog training, I'd probably say, you know, I don't know if it's off topic or not because it's still dog training. But you know, a couple of resources if people are interested in learning more. I would say I think more people probably ought to educate themselves about canine nutrition. Especially, I mean, there's just so many junky foods out there, and then so many good foods that are overpriced, and then there's a lot of good stuff kind of in between. So there's like Steve Brown's book, Unlocking the Canine Ancestral Diet, is pretty good. He's also got a book called Feeding Your Dog the ABC Way. And I've actually used a lot of those, the stuff that I've learned in those books. And then Dr. Karen Becker, who, if you've spent any time in behavior or veterinary or even other training, she's a titan in the veterinary nutritional community. And she's written a whole ton of books. She's got a really great website with some great blogs. I would check out her stuff, but you know, good canine nutrition, just like with humans, you know, whatever you put in is what you get out. If you've got a junky diet, you tend to see more behavior problems. Just like with kids, you know, if kids are eating, you know, sugar-coated sugar bombs at breakfast, they tend to misbehave at school more than if they have a reasonable breakfast.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the cool things that I learned about food is, and it's funny, you know, because it goes back to what we talked about with your two big camps in training. In nutrition, it's the same, you know, so you got people that are like, well, I'll just feed my dog, you know, kibble that I get at the store. And then you've got the raw food people, and they're just, I don't know, what is it about humans that if you're in one camp or the other, like you just have to have a civil war with the other side. Like it doesn't have to be, you know, so you get people like kibble feeders are like, oh, raw food's too expensive. What do you guys think? I'm just made out of money. And then all the raw food people are like, well, you're just killing and poisoning your dog with the kibble. You're awful, horrible. And like, it's not really true. It's not really true. You know, so both Steve Brown and Karen Becker in a nutshell have said kibble is, and take what I say with a grain of salt, because I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just reciting what I've learned in my own research. But kibble is a good quality kibble. You don't have to spend the stuff that's like $110 a bag. If you just, you know, the $70, $60 or $70 range, that's what I buy for 4 dogs. Believe me, it's like I'm pouring it down a well with those clowns. If you get a good quality kibble, it's a complete protein. It's sustainable. It's perfectly good food for dogs. However, for the long term, as you stretch into the years, that's when you start seeing the deficiencies accumulate. It's very easy to offset those deficiencies with fresh toppers, right? So you add to your kibble, like we do sardines, we do pureed vegetables, we do some other prepared meats, you know, and those are toppers. So like you're talking about, Chase, you know, you got a good quality kibble, you're using a raw topper, some freeze-dried stuff, fantastic. Like that is a robust nutritional profile. But, you know, for regular dog owners, and again, my thing is always for the regular dog owner who maybe can't afford to go raw because it's kind of spendy. I'm like, listen, get a good quality kibble, get the best that you can reasonably afford. And then, a couple times a week, put a can of sweet potato on it, or blend up some, broccoli and carrots and cauliflower, put that on it. Get a can of sardines and, spend the week forking those into the food. I mean, your dog will think it's phenomenal, and you've made up all the deficiencies that kibble has. So last thing I'm going to say about that before I totally go into a black hole here is one thing that I really learned that I thought was really interesting to me is that vegetables, great for people, great for dogs, a lot of nutritional benefit, especially cruciferous vegetables, like your broccolis and your all those dark green ones like that, and of course carrots and sweet potatoes and pumpkin and squash and things like that. Great for dogs, great for dogs. However, there's an enzyme in your body that's designed specifically to break down and digest vegetables. Humans being omnivores, that enzyme is in our mouth. So right from the minute you eat a vegetable, you are digesting it efficiently. For dogs, that doesn't enter the system until their small intestine. It's already on the way out. And dogs have a very short and fast digestive system. So if you just feed them vegetables, you're getting like 1% of the nutritional value on it. So pre-digest it, blend it up, turn it into a fine paste, put it on their food. You've stupendously increased the surface area of that vegetable. By the time it goes through their body, like they're extracting way more nutritional value out of it. And that was a big takeaway for me, because I used to toss my dogs carrots and peas and stuff. I'm like, look what a good dog owner I am. I feed my dogs vegetables. And then I'm like, they're just pooping it out, So now I try to do better now that I know better.
Yeah.
I got super into my dog nutrition for a while because I used to do, I still do, but like count my own calories and add up all my micronutrients and macronutrients. So I was looking into that for my dog too, and trying to figure out what are the differences between humans, like what kind of ratios of all these things should they have. So I would make this big pot of food that I would mix in with his kibble, like a ground beef, a sweet potato, or some pumpkin with some veggies. And yeah, it made, so Teddy has some of those eating issues too. He's super picky. And I just make a pot of that every week and just put a little bit of it in with his kibble, and he loves it. And that basically fixed all our eating problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you've and you've created a superfood too, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great. Good stuff.
And it's super easy, just like a pot. Just throw everything in it. He's not picky. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just, he's like, this is awesome. This is great.
Okay. I think you can handle it. Can I push you on a specific off topic? Because that was somewhat on topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was great, but
hit me.
on the music front. I mean, I keep looking at the guitars behind you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about music for a second.
Yeah.
What kind of music do you still play music?
Yeah.
What kind of music do you play? Like, what do you enjoy when you let's say you just pull a guitar down, plug it in or not, if it's acoustic, and you're just like ready to play something? What kind of music do you typically go for?
I would say my go-tos are like hard rock and heavy metal. That's probably 60%. And then another 40% is, like kind of, 80s dark ambient kind of stuff, Cocteau Twins, kind of stuff, really kind of jangly, and Smiths and, stuff like that. But I'd say my biggest wheelhouse is probably hard rock and heavy metal. That's what I do the most. Yeah.
Me too. I figured with the Ibanez back there.
Yeah. Well, I've got 6. I actually have 9. My favorite 6 are on here, and 3 of that of the 6 are 7-string guitars. So
Nice.
Yeah, I got my 6 over there and 7 over there.
nice.
And I'm from New York too. We got, a lot in common here.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I've got a crappy acoustic, crappy electric, and actually kind of a nice-ish bass, I think, that I got for free. But I'm not a huge guitar person. I'm more drums and computer music stuff.
Yeah.
So
I love that stuff too. I really love. I have a big soft spot for techno and dubstep. But yeah, guitar work. Yeah, that's my thing. Now,
yeah,
interesting you say that because off camera over here is um, my 7-string bass over here. I have a Conklin Groove Tools over here. So like when we did our first CD, we'll mention how long ago that was. But I mean, I played all the stringed instruments. You know, I did all the guitars, bass, and even some of the keyboards and stuff. And of course, now I have, off and on, a really, really great bass player that plays bass way better than I could. Plays that 7-string, and I'm just like, I wish I could play that 7-string that well. But so I know you had asked about a funny story. So can I tell you a funny story about that 7-string bass?
yeah,
Okay, so Conklin's kind of, you know, their Conklin multi-string basses are, I mean, they're kind of, I wouldn't say legendary, but they're really popular with bass players. You know, you get like Victor Wooten and, you know, some of these other guys that are big bass players, and they're like, oh yeah, Conklin, I got the 5 and the 6, the 7, the 8, and the 9-string basses, and it just gets bananas, right? And they're expensive, especially I bought that back in like 1995. So it was expensive. It easily over, it was probably about $1,200. In the town I grew up in Medford, Oregon, you guys, if you're into music, you know who Musician's Friend is, who was at the time for a while like the biggest mail order music retailer like on the planet. Musician's Friend started in my hometown. I went to high school with their daughter. And so their very first showroom was just on the other side of the city I grew up in. So I bought all my stuff at Musician's Friend. I mean, it was just, I'd go in there and you'd be like, wow, you know, like a kid. I was in the market for a bass guitar. I wanted a new bass guitar. I had this crappy old off-brand, I don't know, something or other. So I wanted a new bass guitar. I went to Musician's Friend. I had a budget. And that Conklin, 7-string Conklin, normally like $1,200-1,300, was sitting on a guitar stand with a $300 price tag on it. So I was like, hey, you, I'll take that. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah. I feel this is, I don't think we can sell it. That price is, and so, you know, normally I'm an easygoing, nice guy. And I just went, I'm not proud of this. I went full Karen on that guy. I mean, full Karen, before Karen was even a phrase. Like, I mean, just making a scene. Oh, I talked to your manager. No, this is the price. You got to sell it for this. And they're like, they looked at my account and were like, you bought a lot of stuff. Oh my God. Okay. All right. So I handed the guy like $350 cash and I walked out with the 7-string Conklin. Oh boy. Yeah, that's terrible. I'm not proud of myself, but I still have that bad boy sitting there.
nice. That's an awesome story.
It's terrible. Terrible.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we should definitely move into some Q&A here. So,
Yeah.
ask the audience to go ahead and give us some questions from, let's see, let me find. There are a couple of people who ask questions during the conversation, and I want to make sure that they get a chance to ask those as well. So, Dave, Tacoma, you are up if you wanted to ask either your question from earlier or you've got first place for a question now.
I think you took care of my question, Chase. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. All right. Next up is, I'm also making sure these people are still here. Okay, Robert M. Robert M., you're up with a question if you'd like.
We're just asking about different developmental stages in dogs and how you might distinguish some of the traits or techniques that you've expressed tonight. Thank you.
Got it. So I'm going to piggyback on that. Looked like that was when you asked earlier in the chat. So I'm just going to read that out loud. Can you kindly speak to dog development and the appropriate training technique as age relevant? So, I mean, I'd say probably the most significant age dependent piece is early puppyhood. Uh, and that's really important because you have several developmental deadlines and they move really, really quickly. And those are doors that don't really swing shut so much as slam shut. So for example, your proximal age for really productive socialization, by 16 weeks, you're already past the main space where that's effective. I mean, you can still do some reasonable socialization past that point, but you've already missed, it'll just never be what it could have been. So as far as like appropriate training technique, a lot of my advice for puppy owners is like, listen, don't worry too much about all the stuff the internet tells you got to have, like your sits and your downs and your shakes and your stays and your loose leash walking. Like, you need a confident and stable dog. You can do that obedience jazz anytime. Start doing it. The earlier you start, the better to get at it, but don't put all your focus on that. Get that dog off the property, do some functional socialization, start working on your bite inhibition for puppies. That's about 18 weeks to 6 months. The brain chemistry starts to change on that, and you can't do it anymore. And then I'd say those are the two big, probably socialization and acquired bite inhibition in puppies. Those are the two big you have the biggest developmental deadlines for. Almost everything else is a manners and obedience thing. You should start those early on, but you can do those anytime, really. I'm really less concerned about those things. As far as, that old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can. I have a lot of dogs coming through my practice that are 7, 8, 9, 12, 13 years old. It's harder for them. It takes longer for them to acquire. They'll never be as good at it as they probably could have been if they were a puppy. But, you absolutely can, and you should. If you have an old dog and you want to address some of those things, you absolutely can. The training just moves a little slower. So I hope that answered your question. I hope that I addressed that.
Awesome. Thank you. And thanks, Robert. Next up
Thank you.
is Joe.
Hey guys, thanks again for this evening. Thanks for attending, Ian and Chase and Alex as always. It's a great job. You answered actually a lot of my questions, but one of the things that you said that was interesting, and I was wondering if you could expand upon a little, was the idea of how you have to convince a dog that, you're not after his food, and how you have to earn the trust of the dog. What do you exactly do to do that? Like, what is it that how do you establish a relationship with the dog so that it, then begins to understand that it's no longer, you're not after its food?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a sticky process, but essentially the end goal is to teach a dog that, remember, so like I said, dominance is about the distribution of resources. If a dog feels like that a resource is scarce, they'll start to become tense about it. And then if they don't have good coping skills, then they may develop dominance aggression, which is a dysfunctional coping mechanism. So one of the things that we do with that, like for food example, food is one resource with a dog. Sometimes it's toys, sometimes it's sleeping places. There's a bevy of other things that they can become intense about. But part of it is to convince them that it's an abundant resource. Like, it's not something they have to be intense about. Like, so think of like, let's go back in the time machine 20,000 years ago. If you found a rabbit and that was your sustenance for the next 3 to 4 days, you have to protect it because it's also the sustenance for everybody else around you, possibly. And so then it becomes a matter of survival. So being intense about resources isn't a bad thing. You don't have a bad dog that's weird about resources. It's a natural, it's one of the things that's kept them alive long enough for us to domesticate them, for crying out loud. They have to learn to exist in a human home. They're not in the woods anymore. They're not roaming the trash piles of ancient Rome. They're in a human home. And so now we go, hey, listen, Nobody's trying to take your toy. Nobody's trying to take your food. It's okay. You know, just because we came close to it doesn't mean you have to protect it. Now, how do we do that? We do that by changing their emotional response to our proximity. And so there's things that you can do to change what their expectation is of your proximity. So here's an example. Dog has a food bowl. I walk close to it. The dog gets real low. He stiffens up and he growls. Right? I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you're weird about me being close to your bowl while you're eating it. I need to change your expectation of what it means for me to be close to your bowl. So some things I might do is I might only give the dog half of his dinner. He puts it down. I walk close to the bowl and I just toss some food into it. And he's like, I did not expect that. I did not expect that. Right? And I just do that every night. I walk by the bowl, even if he growls, even he kind of hunkers down and he growls, I just toss food in the bowl. Another example, another variation of that is sometimes if you have a dog that's really weird about a bowl, I'll set the bowl on the counter. We'll go through the whole rigmarole of fixing it up and getting ready. Be like, you ready for dinner? You ready for dinner? You're like, yeah, I'm real hungry. Let's go. And then I set down an empty bowl. And they kind of look at it and they're like, well, what the heck, man? And I go, oh, did you want some? Oh, okay, I'll take care of that. So I grab a handful of food. I walk up to the bowl and I drop a handful of food in it. And then they eat that. And then I take another handful and I drop it in there. And so the whole expectation of what it means for me to be close to their bowl starts to shift. They're like, well, this actually isn't so bad if you come close. You know, like you're actually coming close. You give me things. You don't take things away. So that's just an example of how we can start to shift, you know, their outlook on what that context means and start making a more positive emotional response. You know, I don't have to do that forever, because once they kind of like, oh, well, I don't really care if you're close. I'm like, well, great. Well, here, you can have all your dinner now and I'll just go about my business. Similar kinds of protocols for food and similar kinds of protocols for sleeping places and things like that. You know, you want to be supportive. You don't want to reprimand the dog because, like I said, it's not an inherently bad behavior. It just doesn't work for us in a household. So, you know, I'm not going to treat you like a criminal. You're not a bad dog for doing it. You don't have to do that. Like, I don't want your stupid toy. You know, I'm not going to take it from you. It's okay. You know, it's yours. Just don't be weird if I'm come close.
Awesome.
I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Joe. My pleasure.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Last but not least, looks like Julian.
All right. Thanks for the interview. A lot of great information. My question is, my girlfriend's really interested in psychology and wants to get into dog training. So I want to know if you have any advice as to, you know, for getting into this field.
Yeah, that's really cool. Great question, Julian. So listen, most of what we know about applied psychology, we know from observing animals, right? So the biggest breakthrough with, you know, Ivan Pavlov with classical conditioning, it was from an experiment with his dogs. You know, B.F. Skinner, you know, the father of modern training, who named operant conditioning. Obviously, he didn't invent operant conditioning. He just discovered it, you know, like gravity. If it's always been there, we just go, oh, this is a thing. We should learn about this. All of his work with operant conditioning is centered around animals, you know. So applied psychology is applied psychology. You know, if you're working with humans, obviously there's some human specific things you got to do. But if you're interested, or your girlfriend is interested in learning about the psychology that goes deep into dog training, I mean, even just a basic psychology textbook will give you a lot of really solid foundation on that stuff. The more that you understand about operant conditioning and classical conditioning and applied behavior, you know, that whole antecedent behavior consequence loop, and how functional behavior manifests in an environment around signals, you know, that kind of stuff is applicable to almost any organism with a nervous system, for crying out loud. So you can't go wrong with just some of that stuff. If she wants to learn about that, I would recommend a book. It's expensive, but you can find it used on Amazon. It's called hold on, let me say, I got it right here. There we go. Learning and Behavior by Paul Chance. Paul Chance is a world-class behaviorist. But this book is humongous. Anything by Paul Chance, actually, if she wants to get into it, it's going to be spendy, and it's going to be dense. You know, I mean, this is like a college textbook, but holy smokes! I mean, you could just even, you know, blind flip to a page with your highlighter and get a lot of good stuff out of it. So, yeah, any of that kind of stuff to get into it is a great start. And the more you understand about it, the more specific dog training protocols make sense to you. And you're like, oh, okay, I see how that works. I see why we're doing that. And I think that's important. Not to get off on a tangent, but I think that a lot of new dog trainers and a lot of dog trainers that kind of just do it as a hobby, you know, maybe like a side hustle. Like they really just learn dog training as a series of recipes. You know, they're like, well, if we want to teach a dog to walk, we do 1, 2, 3, 4. If we teach a dog to sit, we do 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, and that's just like a mechanic following a manual and doesn't really understand how the pieces fit together or why we do it that way. And so I think if she wants to kind of dive into some of that matrix code, as it were, and kind of tease some of that out and learn how to read it, she'll be 10 times the dog trainer, you know. Then she'll be like, oh, okay, that's why what I was doing wasn't working. And that's why this system works better than this system. So important. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I hope that was helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Julian. And thanks again. Ian, this has been amazing. You've been very generous with your time. This is an awesome conversation. If people are interested in following up with you, seeing more of your work, I know we mentioned the YouTube channel. Could you just list all the places people can find you and, you know, either see what you're doing or get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So most everything I do is under my business name, Simpatico. So we have our YouTube channel, which is fairly active. We have our Facebook page. We have over 10,000 followers, and I do a Facebook Live every Friday at noon Eastern, where, you know, I do some training talk, we do some live Q&A, and we're really building a pretty cool community there. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. We have several Pinterest boards that we add to all the time. And then, you know, if you just pop by my website, it's simpatico-training.com. I have a pretty robust learning hub there where we have, you know, our videos, a bunch of blog articles that I've written, and I try to keep a good resource hub of, you know, like training glossary, free PDFs for a lot of problems. You know, there's a lot of people that are like, hey, I need help with this, but, you know, you're booked out for the next 3 months. I'm like, hey, I got a PDF for it on my website. Help yourself. Take everything you want. It's yours. It's free. So lots of places where you can connect with us and steal whatever you want. I'm really all about giving away as much free as I can, and then that leaves us to dive into the really interesting stuff when we talk.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, like I said, this has been amazing. I will include all the links to those things in the various show notes and descriptions across all of our platforms. Any closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts.
Parting words.
Parting words. Hey, listen, everybody out there listening who's working with their pet dog, you know, most things that aren't that big of a deal. You're going to screw up. I've screwed up. All of my colleagues have screwed up before. You know, as long as you're, I'll tell you what, one of my favorite life coaches, believe it or not, was a yoga teacher that was really big in the 90s named Brian Kest. and I don't do a whole lot of yoga, but when I do his stuff. And he said a lot during his classes that I was just like, what? That's like an awesome life gem. And one of the things that he said in his class was, you know, he's talking about like, if you're breathing, you're doing it right. If you're feeling something, you're doing it right. If you're accumulating heat, you're doing it right. And then he goes, if you are doing the best you can, you are doing this class perfectly. And I'm like, oh my God. I've stolen so many Brian Kess lines that I use in my own classes live because it's good stuff. And so if you're a dog owner and you get online and you read all the different training stuff and you're just like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to screw this dog up. I don't know what I'm doing. This is so scary. Just be kind, just be loving, and just, if you're doing the best you can, you are raising that dog perfectly. All right. So it's, most stuff with a pet dog ain't that big a deal. You can walk back from just about everything. And if you get in a pickle, you know, loop a pro in. I'm sure they can help you sew up the loose ends. But that's my gem. It's all about keeping learning and keeping practicing, and just, you know, come from a place of love.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah.
I always say those things, you know, and I mean it with I really, really mean it. I'm genuine about it. And then every time I say it out loud, I'm like, oh my God, that was the corniest thing.
No, it was good. That was a beautiful closing note. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. I've really, really had a nice time chatting with you guys and everybody else that asked questions. And I had a great time. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
Cool.
Awesome.
So that ends the podcast recording. Normally we do a wrap up, but we're ending a little later than we normally would. So I'm going to let everybody go to bed unless anybody has any specific feedback, takeaways, things that you want to pull out of the conversation. But there are only a couple of us left. So let me allow people to unmute themselves again. And yeah, thanks a lot, Ian.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm willing to stick around if anybody has anything else they want to say, but yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Teddy,
just can I actually ask one really quick question? It was the idea of you mentioned dogs were, you know, scavengers, right? And you were just explaining to me how you were teaching them to not worry about that. Is that like kind of does that make them less scavenger like, in the sense that if you're breaking their habit from you know, their fears of, you know, being protective of their food, like do they become like less scavenger like? I'm not asking that clearly, but is it go against their nature? Or are you retraining the way they naturally think?
Well, no, I get what you're saying, Joe, and not necessarily. And here's why. So any of those behavior patterns like that, so, you know, like your predators, the behavior patterns that go into prey drive, and like your scavengers, the behavior patterns that go into scavenging, generally those things have a really high failure rate. You know, so I've read once where like hunting in the wild for wolves has like a 70% failure rate. So, you know, there's that hunger drive that's where it's a biological need to seek and acquire the food. And the same with a scavenger, it's a biological need for survival. However, the process for acquiring that food, whether you're hunting or you're scavenging, because there's such a high failure rate, Mother Nature has made that inherently enjoyable to just engage in the process, whether or not you are successful. That's a survival trait that keeps you doing it. So in your question, you know, I can help a dog be less intense about food in certain contexts, but that doesn't necessarily diminish any scavenging behaviors they may do, because scavenging all by itself away from the food is inherently enjoyable and satisfying. So what you're actually getting into there is a really big part of what we call canine enrichment. And canine enrichment is really centered on satisfying some of those desires in a functional, productive way so that they can still coexist. You know, I don't want a dog raiding all the trash piles in the neighborhood, but I may allow a dog to do some forage feeding in the backyard, or, you know, just scatter some food in the kitchen that he can kind of forage for and scavenge. And that way they're getting to, and nose work, for example, nose work is a sport, but that satisfies some of those scavenging behavior patterns. So, you know, we want to allow dogs the opportunity to satisfy those desires and engage in those behaviors. We just have to tweak things so that they work in human society, you know. So those two things, I guess the short answer is they're not incompatible. You know, a dog can learn to be like, okay, I don't have to be uptight about my food and still be a scavenger.
Interesting. So yeah, thank you. That answered it perfectly. Yeah, thank you for that
Yeah,
distinction.
my pleasure. Yeah, great question. Great question.
I have some feedback for you. I think one of the things that I appreciate about the way that you explain things is that you have a way of explaining very technical things in, for example, dog psychology in a way that's extremely palatable. And I think, and I'm not sure because I'm not inside your head, but I think what it is that you understand that most people are capable of grasping complex things. They just need it, like they need the walkthrough up to it. Sometimes they need the metaphors or the analogies, and you seem to have a really good grasp on that. So I think throughout our conversation, that was part of what I noticed, and throughout even the way that you explain things in your YouTube videos and things like that. Like that's something that I really appreciate about your method of explanation.
Thank you. Thank you. That really means a lot to me, Chase, because that is absolutely on purpose.
Good. Good.
Yeah, that's totally. And, you know, in the forums and stuff, on the professional organizations, I follow a lot of forums, and you hear a lot of that a lot. Like, oh, that's way too technical. You know, people need, you know, they need the Reader's Digest version. They need this and that. And I'm like, I disagree. Like, I think it's not a matter of it being too technical. It's the presentation. Like, it just needs to be presented in a way that people can feel successful understanding the concept. You know, I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson does that stuff all the time with astrophysics. I mean,
Right.
come on. If you can do it with astrophysics, I can do it with dog training.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I agree. And that's something that we used to routinely try to coax from our guests, and we've done that a little bit less because I think it threw off the way that people naturally explained things. But we noticed, for example, one of our way back episodes before we had a live audience, we interviewed John Azariah, who is the head of Microsoft Research Quantum.
mm-hmm.
So quantum computing, right? That's a heavy subject.
For sure.
And in his case, I think it actually did help because we knew right off the bat, all right, this is super technical, sciencey stuff. Like, just tell them right off the bat, look, our audience can follow you wherever you go, but you got to lead them the whole way. Like, you got to make the path from here to there, and we'll help you not skip stuff because quantum is really hard to wrap your head around.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, I think it helped, but I think now we tend to not give that reminder because it throws off people's natural patterns. But then we're looking for that when people are explaining things, and we're trying to coax that kind of thing out of them. So yeah, it's awesome to just straight up hear it from you, you know, that way.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's a good validation for me. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, you must have been an excellent teacher. So just wanted to add that. So
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, I've got to get to bed. So good night, everybody. Good night, Ian. Thanks again for coming on.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I really had fun. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this.
Good. Awesome. One more thing. If you do ever feel like you want to check out, I'll send you a link to the rest of the meetup. I know you're probably crazy busy, but meetups like this, not hosted by us, but hosted by Shrikant and some of his other friends as well, happen basically every single day. And they're all on amazing topics. And the audience is always like this, if not even better.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's really cool. So feel free to check that out and, you know, come sit in on any of the other discussions. And
Yeah,
all that.
for sure. You'll send me some info on that?
Yeah. I'll send you the link.
Oh, word. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, Cool. All right.
A lot
Good night,
smarter.
everybody. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
I mean, I haven't attended much other than like our ones, but even just us being here once a week with this group, I feel like I've gotten significantly smarter. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Great. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'd
actually,
love to-
Alex changed one of my habits. He, said it in one of his discussions when he said, when you get up in the morning, that you, instead of hitting the snooze button, you'll meditate.
yeah,
So yeah, I try and do that. Yeah. So
That's good advice, actually. That's
yeah,
really
yeah, it makes it totally productive. So
but gets you going.
now whether I fall back asleep, I can't help. But I do meditate though. So
Awesome.
but